While dramatically pushing open a large set of doors, a well-dressed man declares that today, he, Sherlock, a high-ranking demon, shall become the owner of this dungeon. No one hears his words as he looks over the overgrown walkways and stone ruins before him. In the distance, we see the ceiling of a cavern high overhead, implying that this ruin is somewhere deep underground. As Sherlock makes his way forward into the dilapidated masonry of what we can assume is his new dungeon, he considers what a dungeon is. They are structures of unknowns, darkness, fear, and death, and are considered the most mysterious of all constructions found in the underworld. Only demons who own a dungeon are worthy of the title of Demon Lord. The most respected among the demon lords are those who build a top-tier dungeon, one with a mighty army of demonic forces and a steady stream of income. Sherlock reflects that if he can do this, he too can become the ultimate demon lord. Thinking back to his childhood, we discover that Sherlock was born as a high-ranking demon, but somehow ended up growing up in a slum. He's felt the cold eyes and ridicule of society throughout his whole life, all of which has only made him more determined to accumulate the wealth and glory of a proper demon lord. After having struggled for hundreds of years, Sherlock has finally saved up enough money to buy the very first dungeon of his life. Gathering magical energy in his hand, Sherlock declares to himself that he will overcome the circumstances of his birth, and that he will eventually surpass all other demons and build the best dungeon in the world. Approaching a jeweled stone at the heart of the dungeon, he prepares his personal seal, then channels magic into the stone. Once the stone is activated, he stamps it firmly with the seal, marking this dungeon as his property. As the magical process continues, Sherlock thinks back to why he selected this dungeon. He reflects that it was not because of the amazing hidden benefits which the succubus in the sales department implied this dungeon had, while convincing him to purchase. We briefly see a flashback of an attractive woman with horns and a tail spouting outrageous claims about the property, like that it would guarantee his health and freedom for 1 year, and that he would hit the pinnacle of his life in 3 years if he bought it, followed by a very pointed request to just buy the place already. Sherlock continues to recall that he also didn't select this dungeon for its worthless diamond mines, or for the fact that it's only a day's journey to reach from the surface, exposing him to increased danger from raiding. The reason he purchased this dungeon, which is so shoddy that he will have to restart the central dungeon core himself, was not because he wanted an additional challenge. No, we learn that the reason Sherlock purchased this terrible dungeon is quite simple. This was the only dungeon he could afford. This is the cheapest dungeon in the entire underworld. Reflecting that there's no use in worrying about all that now, Sherlock goes to reactivate the core of the dungeon and begin his great works. With another flash of magical energy, a somewhat cute demonic face appears in the crystal. It declares itself as Servant Saber, saying it was summoned by his call, and asks Sherlock if he is his new master. Sherlock is totally confused by the fact that the core is speaking to him, and then gains a look of concerned fear as he quickly tries to consult a manual, remarking that there was nothing in the book about this behavior. Sherlock continues to read his manual, concerned that his new dungeon is in some way defective. Saber looks on in confusion, asking if perhaps he's time traveled and perhaps Sherlock is some kind of aborigine. This only concerns Sherlock more, as these are strange phrases to him. Declaring that there's something wrong with this core, Sherlock angrily stands up and says that he'll have to go back to the sales lady for a refund, reflecting that, of course, the dungeon he'd bought for cheap wasn't any good. With a look of fear on his cute floating face, Saber yells for his new master to please stop and reconsider. He says the phrases he just mentioned were something he learned while in another world, and clarifies that there is nothing wrong with him. He begs Sherlock to not refund his purchase of the dungeon, fearful that the bad conditions and location could mean this place might not be activated again for 10,000 years. He finishes his plea by calling Sherlock the future Great Demon Lord, which causes Sherlock to stop in his tracks. Apparently Sherlock is an absolute sucker for flattery, as upon hearing this, he thinks to himself that this core must have great perception, to sense his great future potential. The confusion Sherlock has been expressing becomes a bit clearer to us, as he thinks to himself that he has never heard of a talking dungeon core before. Concluding that perhaps this is some kind of rare species, Sherlock realizes that this core might be a helpful subordinate. Since this core can apparently think and speak, shouldn't this make carrying out his plans simpler after all? Without wasting time, Sherlock firmly declares that he wants a dungeon with 100 monster rooms, 10 kitchens, 10 interrogation rooms, 10 torture chambers, and 2 huge training sites. His excitement rising, he also says he wants a maze to tempt the surface adventurers, a library and a treasury, along with a luxurious bedroom and a trove of wealth to go with it all. His ambitions listed out, Sherlock looks eagerly at Saber, who meets his gaze. Saber declares all right, my master, and extends the glowing energy around his head to offer an appendage to Sherlock, which he shakes, confirming their new relationship. Saber proudly states he will help Sherlock become the greatest demon lord. We now learn a bit more about how the dungeons of this world function. Different levels of dungeons can summon different monsters by channeling magic power into the dungeon core. To upgrade a dungeon, one can purchase or seize a core, and then have one dungeon core absorb the magical energy of the other core. Sherlock considers that his dungeon is currently the lowest level possible, and as such, he can only summon goblins. Eager to launch into his great plans, Sherlock declares that they should summon their first dungeon labourers. Saber tells him to wait a moment. He calmly points out that if goblins are recruited in the conventional way, they'd need to be paid 5 magic stones a month. With an evil grin, Saber presents an alternative. What if they were to contract their goblins from another world? He explains that not only would they require no salary, they'll work hard for Sherlock and even make him money. Sherlock is both confused and intrigued by this proposition, asking why the goblins would pay him money. Saber explains that, in the terms of another world, these are called whales. Sherlock seems a bit unclear on what Saber means, but thinks to himself that he really doesn't have any magic stones to pay goblins with right now. He does believe there's a possibility that magic stones can be mined up during the process of expanding the dungeon, but also doesn't think the yield for them will be impressive. Sold on the idea of free labour, Sherlock says they'll try it. He asks how they go about summoning otherworldly goblins. Saber asks him to transfer magic into him, and he will begin working on a thing called a server, which Sherlock can think of as a portal between 2 worlds. Saber continues, commenting that the construction of the server will take about a week and require a lot of magic power to support. He then asks Sherlock if his lord has confidence in this plan. Sherlock gives a dramatic sneer and declares that, as a noble high-ranking demon, of course he's ready. The magic costs will be no problem. Magical forces swirl around the room as Sherlock channels the needed energy into Saber. Saber then begins talking to himself as he works, initializing a process which sounds rather magical, but looks very technical. He declares that the dimensional breakthrough is successful and starts searching for a signal. Once the signal connection is up, he begins building the server. 1 week later, we see Sherlock standing before what appears to be a modern network server. Saber declares with pride that the portal is complete. Saber then decides this would be a good time to warn his lord that the goblins from another world may behave very strange. They might give Sherlock an odd nickname, or form gangs, or get into trade disputes, or start any other number of small problems. In short, they will act like children. With a smile, Saber tells his demon lord that he hopes he's prepared for this. Sherlock wonders if this can't be easily managed, but Saber tells him it will be difficult due to cultural differences. He then explains that the most effective way to manage them is by using the official website. This phrase causes Sherlock some stress, as here Saber is talking about things he's never heard of before again. But Saber patiently explains that he can understand this website as an embassy between the worlds. After more explanation, Sherlock says he thinks he understands, and that the hobbies of these otherworld goblins seem strange to him. But so long as he doesn't have to pay them, he doesn't think any of this will be a problem. Saber goes on to explain that Sherlock's main role in this operation will be to maintain and manage the official website, and use it to recruit skilled goblins and promote his dungeon. Saber comments that it should be no problem for his lord to learn the language of the otherworld and operate the site. He then declares that they should give their dungeon a loud name. We now see an announcement for the first virtual reality online game, Dungeon Eternal Kingdom, stating that they're recruiting their first test players. Various humans from around the world take an interest seeing this announcement on their computer. It looks like players are interested in trying this new game, and many apply for the test player slots. Back in the dungeon, Sherlock is shocked, as he's never heard of goblins lining up to apply like this for dungeon work. Saber, who Sherlock has taken to calling Blue, explains that while there are over 800 million other world players to possibly recruit from, The current state of the Eternal Kingdom server means that they can only support 100 players total right now, and he then encourages Sherlock to select his candidate soon. Sherlock reviews the various profiles, approves the ones he wants, and then declares that now it's summoning time. As he presses return on his keyboard, magical energy jumps out and streaking lights beam off into the ether, somehow connecting the two worlds. An announcement plays on screens around the Earth, stating that Eternal Kingdom opens today. 100 lucky test players are qualified for the first test round. Congratulations to you all. Your virtual game equipment was delivered last night. Chapter 2. Sherlock stands in the heart of the dungeon, the server machine nearby. He remarks to Saber that there's an important thing they'll need to do before welcoming their first test players. Saber asks what that is, and with a grin, Sherlock raises a golden scroll which unfurls and opens a rift in reality and declares that it's time to go purchase a pickaxe. We now see the European-style town of Winterfell, where Sherlock has a passage note of some sort stamped at the entrance as the bored goblin clerks gossip about their lives. With a thanks, Sherlock heads out into the town market, where various merchants are calling out their goods for sale. Sherlock takes no interest in these merchants, thinking to himself that all he's seeing is low-end junk. Saber asks his master how many magic stones he brought, and Sherlock comments that he brought 1,000 footweight magic stones, as that's all he has. Saber's reaction tells us that this is not an especially impressive amount to go shopping with. Sherlock enters a blacksmith shop and is met by what appears to be a golem of some kind, who speaks strangely about various items they sell and offers him a cup of tea. Accepting it, Sherlock states that he's here to purchase 3 things only: 1 iron ore pickaxe, 1 cheap iron ore pickaxe, and a bulk order of 100 cheap pickaxes. The golem is delighted with the size of the order and offers to throw in a free home delivery for a total amount of just 1,000 magic stones. This price quote causes Sherlock to spit out his tea in shock, amazed that iron ore is so expensive. If he were to purchase this, there'd be no money left over to buy food for his workers. Sensing his reaction, the golem merchant wisely changes tactics, telling him that he looks like an aspiring demon lord trying to outfit a new dungeon, and brings Sherlock's attention to a discount package which his shop offers. To 800 magic stones, they will build him a blacksmith shop of his own and include 20 mining picks. Sherlock can't deny that this is a good deal for his needs. Saber and Sherlock whisper back and forth, realizing that with a blacksmith shop, they can not only make their own pickaxes in the future, but as Saber greedily points out, they could even sell items to their goblin workers, undercutting the prices in the city. This possibility shocks Sherlock, as he had not considered selling items to his own workers. Blue patiently puts on his professor hat and further explains, if the goblins have money, they'll buy items directly from him, and if they don't, they'll be willing to do hard work to earn the money needed. This is an amazing feature of these strange workers from another world, and by exploiting, carefully incentivizing their labor force, they can actually profit off distributing items. With the situation clear, Sherlock confidently grabs his bag of magic stones, slaps it on the table, and orders the blacksmith shop package. The golem politely thanks him for his purchase, and the scene fades to sometime in the future, as Sherlock and Saber watch the hired golem workers finishing up the task of building their new dungeon blacksmith shop. Sherlock proudly states that after all this work on their part, it's time for them to summon their first workers and have them finally do the heavy lifting. Saber stops him, however, warning that no novice missions have been posted yet. Sherlock is again confused by Saber's odd use of gaming terms. Saber explains that this will be a series of small goals, which will help their new players understand the various features of their world. Saber states that, while these otherworldly players do not need to be paid monthly, they do need clear tasks by which they can gain experience and upgrade themselves. Sherlock looks a bit daunted and thinks to himself that he didn't expect this all to be so troublesome. Sherlock says that, with their dungeon just starting out, if Saber intends for him to hand out magic stones as his quest rewards, then he'll be the first demon lord to go broke before even starting dungeon operations. Saber reassures him and states that they don't have to use magic stones. Gold coins will also make a suitable reward. Sherlock contemplates a gold coin in his hand and comments that he has quite a few of these. We then learn a bit about how money works in this world. Gold coins are the popular currency of the surface lands, along with smaller value silver and copper coins. However, in the underground world, magic stones are the preferred currency, prized for their scarcity. The magic stones are formed naturally in various environments, and there are also methods to create the stones by extracting them from creatures or even crafting them directly from magical energy. Assured that these otherworld players will accept the surface currency he considers worthless, Sherlock slams the coin down on the table and declares that he loves this. Saber states that all they'll need to do is offer these coins as rewards for quests, and players will be able to sort out the rest of the economic details from there. Their conversation is interrupted by the appearance of a person in the distance, who wonders aloud if this could be the fledgling dungeon. We get a closer look at this short-bearded man and learn that he's of the race of dark iron dwarves, known for their blacksmithing and forging skills. The man carries a hammer, wears a smithy's apron, and has some kind of flip-down face shield on his head, so we know he's ready for business. This demon lord looks too young, the man declares. Walking up to Sherlock, the dwarf introduces himself as Simba and presents his contract, expecting to contract for 3 months of work at a rate of 100 magic stones per month. Apparently, this arrangement came with the purchase of the blacksmith shop package. Simba asks the young demon lord to confirm this offer. Sherlock welcomes Simba, informing him that he will be the first hired subordinate of this dungeon as he reviews the contract. Sherlock then shows Simba to the newly built blacksmith shop and tells him this will be his workshop. Sherlock then explains that he will be working on preparing some portable food for his goblin workers. Simba bows and says he will get to work, and Sherlock smiles, thinking that things are proceeding nicely now. Saber informs his lord that the time to start up their server is almost upon them, and the two go to the heart of the dungeon. Magical energy flows from Sherlock, and he declares that now is the time to call his workers to him. He calls them to come forth and offer their allegiance to their great demon lord. This dramatic speech is apparently wasted, however, as nothing appears to have been summoned. With a dejected look, Sherlock asks what happened and why there are no subordinates in front of him. Saber explains that they're still all in the character creation screen, and that players often care a lot about the most insignificant things, such as body looks, clothing, and equipment decorations. A voice suddenly shouts out "wow," and a small green goblin is now in the dungeon with them. What a tall NPC! He remarks with amazement and shouts about how incredible the technology for this game is. He says he had no idea games were so realistic these days, and that he can hardly believe how far things have come. He pinches his skin and shouts out with amazement and delight that he seems to have full sensory integration, even feeling the sensation of pain. Sherlock unveils his wings. I guess he had magic wings the whole time, and dramatically speaks to his first summoned servant, asking him to hurry up and pledge his allegiance to the Dark Lord and receive his mercy and protection. While Sherlock outwardly looks like a very cool and collected demon lord, as he strikes a pose and says this, internally, he's giddy with the excitement of his first successful summoning. The goblin then speaks, stating that ManhwaCapped pledges his allegiance to the great demon Sherlock. A small scroll indicating his name pops up above his head upon saying this. He then comments that the sense of oppressive aura coming from this demon lord NPC is amazing, and that he almost couldn't help but kneel. He excitedly says he can't wait to tell everyone on the forum about this. We see another goblin enter the world, this one named Kuruko Yumikawa. With a bit of an alarmed look on his face, Sherlock wonders to himself why these goblins are picking names which seem totally strange and foreign to him. Soon the dungeon is filling up with goblins, with various ones asking classic starting player questions, such as how to get a novice player bonus, or if there's no way to use emoji in the game. Another goblin player points out that of course there's no emoji. After all, this game works by capturing data from their nervous system directly, so there's no keyboard or input device to use. He then points out that even his tongue is flexible, and that no other games have this level of detail. Another goblin asks what they're supposed to do now, and wonders if there's a tutorial to be found somewhere. Another one agrees, asking if there are some quests or if they're expected to explore things freely. Yet another goblin, apparently late to log in, shouts about how impressed he is with how handsome they made the Demon Lord Sherlock NPC model. Getting perhaps a bit annoyed, Sherlock bids his new servants to be quiet. He introduces himself and tells them that from today forward, they are now citizens of the dungeon Eternal Kingdom, and that their mission will be to constantly improve this domain, such that they can build the greatest dungeon ever seen. The assembled goblins cheer, and Sherlock reflects that they seem to have accepted their task. Chapter 3, Sherlock tells the goblins to go get their assignments and start building the dungeon. The goblins access a floating board which seems to be handing out job assignments, and various goblins comment on their assignments. Some saying they'll be mining, others saying they wish they could be mining as they got assigned brick carrying. Voices shout out, and the dungeon seems to be springing to life as the goblin players run around attempting to figure out the mechanics of what is, in their eyes, the hottest new online game. Sherlock thinks to himself that the auras they're collecting can be made into more picks and also into new weapons and armor for his forces. After all, how can a proper dungeon lack an armed force to defend it? The lower levels of the dungeon are unexplored and probably full of dangerous monsters, so naturally, Sherlock will need to plan to have his workers properly equipped for such dangers. Sherlock's musings are cut short when the goblin Kuruko approaches him. With a sparkle in his eyes, the goblin boldly asks if there will be any special server opening rewards. As Sherlock looks back at the goblin with total confusion, Kuruko remarks to himself that he would have figured this NPC would be the one to ask. Sherlock says nothing back to this, as the request makes no sense to him. Another goblin, with the excellent gamer name body temperature is -8, approaches Sherlock and begs for a higher mining drop rate. Others immediately chime in, asking for this as well. Sherlock has no idea what to make of this. Are these goblins not afraid of him? A mighty demon lord. Why are these weak otherworldly goblins so brave to speak to him so casually like this? These thoughts are abruptly interrupted by a very loud thud sound. Looking over at what happened, Sherlock sees that Simba has struck a goblin on the skull with his hammer for some reason. Sherlock notices that these goblins seem to have no fear of death. Another goblin approaches Sherlock and announces that his mission is complete. Sherlock thinks to himself that while these goblins' behavior is certainly odd, they appear to be extremely agile workers, and they seem incredibly enthusiastic and efficient. Since they don't cost him real money, the small flaw of them acting strange seems like a minor problem, all things considered. Saber approaches his master and announces that the first test period has been successfully started. He announces that now would be the time to improve the game's content, website, and various features. Sherlock is confused, asking what needs to be added. Saber explains that since the goblins see all this work as entertainment, if he wants to keep his workers engaged and working hard, he will need to come up with new content and things to do. Sherlock seems to get the idea, saying he'll need to basically open up more areas to function as playgrounds for these goblins. He regrets that he doesn't have enough magic stones to afford a combat arena yet, but Saber corrects him there, saying that the players will be looking for something other than an arena, that they will want to leave the dungeon and seek brutal battles against strong foes. The stronger their enemy, the more the players will love it, and they will fight fiercely with no fear of death. If players who like this type of adventure run into something too powerful for them to fight alone, they will likely band together to defeat it. Saber points out that for this system to work optimally, they need to be sure to hand out generous rewards to those who fight these larger monsters. Understanding, Sherlock remarks that he'll simply need to open up an area with a stable source of monsters, loot and treasure, ideally with a high-level monster to function as a final boss, and that this should give his otherworld players the risky entertainment they seem to crave. Pulling a blue glowing sword from literally nowhere, Sherlock comments that he'll need to get better acquainted with the surrounding areas of the dungeon. He tells Saber that once he gets back, they can work on the mentioned map and website materials. Sometime later, we see Sherlock walking through an area called the Spider's Nest. As he walks, he considers that this would make a fitting playground for his new workers. The amount of monsters here should remain stable, as long as there's at least one spider queen laying eggs in the area. After all, one spider queen can lay hundreds of eggs, which will then hatch within minutes. Sounds terrifying to me, dear listeners? Sherlock thinks to himself that, in addition to having stable populations, the spiders like to dig, so the whole area has become a giant labyrinth of winding passages. This should provide the kind of challenge his otherworldly players crave, he thinks, as we watch him slaughtering the current spider population to thin it out and leave only one queen behind. As he finishes this task, Sherlock is interrupted by the appearance of Saber, who announces to his lord that a player has died. Sherlock asks what could have happened. Is there some kind of foreign invasion? Saber informs him that no, this player died by jumping off a wall. Sherlock and Saber warp back to the dungeon center and look upon the dead goblin body. With a bit of concern, Sherlock asks if this could have happened because he assigned too stressful of work to the goblin. However, undisturbed, Saber announces that this will be a perfect time to find out exactly how resurrection will work, as he's not entirely sure about the details on this. The goblins have gathered around the dead body and express their amazement at the level of NPC animation details. Seeing the grave concerned Sherlock is clearly showing for this dead worker. Sherlock thinks to himself that if he wants to revive this goblin, he would need to go to the edges of the world and retrieve his soul from the underworld. It would certainly be more convenient to just summon another goblin to replace this dead one, right? Saber clarifies to his lord that the goblin's soul was not confiscated into the underworld, as Sherlock would have expected. This confuses Sherlock, as even if the goblin was summoned from another world, shouldn't any soul which dies in this world have to go to the underworld? With a bit of suspicion, Sherlock asks how Saber got around this rule. Did he steal their souls? Saber explains that the various techniques and tricks he used to create the summoning server are in fact only projecting the player's consciousness into their world, while leaving their souls back in their original bodies. As such, if the goblins' bodies are repaired, it's no trouble to attach the projected consciousness to the body. If their body is totally destroyed, they can send their consciousness back to the character creation screen and make a new body. Again, the various gaming terms seem to be confusing Sherlock, as we watch him desperately looking through his dungeon core manual, commenting that he didn't remember reading about anything like this. Saber proudly states that this is a function unique to him, since he's somehow able to fuse magic and technology together. It's approaching the dead goblin, which we now see is good old goblin number 2. Kuruko, Sherlock reaches out his hand, using his magic power to repair the body on the ground. After a moment, Kuruko sits up with a start, and someone in the crowd shouts, "Damn, he really resurrected." This is followed by various questions being shouted by the assembled goblins, as they note that it appears that resurrection has to be done by the Lord himself, and that he had to repair the body before he could revive the dead worker. The excitement about learning more about their game world's mechanics leads another nearby goblin to declare that he wants to try this also. And, without hesitation, he throws himself into the fires of the nearby forge, giving himself an immediate game over. You know, normally we have to be a bit euphemistic when discussing actions like this on YouTube, but in this case, it's actually what's happening. Moments later, we see the same goblin popping back into existence, apparently having used the character creator to make himself a new body. He happily declares to his assembled gaming family that he's alive again. His joy seems to be quickly cut short once he realizes that, by perishing in this manner, he's lost all his gear and coins to the fires of the forge. Sherlock is not pleased. The goblins seem to be coming up with even more odd ideas concerning death, and Sherlock decides to take action. Gathering his majestic might, he sternly commands his underlings to not die for no reason, terrifying them all into compliance. Later, Sherlock sits at a large computer terminal next to the magical server and thinks to himself that the monster guide and map have been edited and updated, and that such an occasion calls for an announcement. We see the message sent to the players, telling them that the first player testing is going smoothly and that there would be a new map test starting tomorrow for the spider's lair. New dungeon mobs are advertised, such as the subterranean spider, the killer vine, and the Spider Queen. A note at the bottom announces that the Spider Queen's hair is a magic material which Lord Sherlock is especially interested in, and that those who can collect it will gain reputation and the Lord's favour, along with an explanation that most loot found can be exchanged for currency in the core centre of the dungeon. Turning to Saber, Sherlock concernedly asks why they're announcing that he cares about Spider Queen hair, and for that matter, why should his underlings need favours and reputation when they're already sworn to him anyway? Is this intended as a new trick for the players? Saber explains that the otherworldly players are not like normal dungeon creatures, which have little need for identity or honour. Instead, they thrive on it. Sherlock smiles in understanding, and remarks that this reminds him of the humans he's met on the surface world. Saber continues pointing out that as the lord of the entire dungeon, having the lord's favour and a reputation among peers is how the players value their existence. By working for these things, they are in fact showing their great love and respect for their lord. I have to say, Saber has quite the silver tongue, don't you think? Looking over his dungeon's website again, Sherlock notes that there's a lot of activity and interest in the site. He decides that he's suddenly curious what the players are saying about him and opens the forums section. Saber remarks that his ears are tingling at the thought of people talking about him. The first thing Sherlock sees is a topic titled First Test Player Breaks the News. Here's the most complete and cutting-edge Dungeon Eternal Kingdom strategy guide. Chapter 4. Sherlock leans in, interested in the video playing on his magical computer. This is a great chance for us to see the player's perspective on this whole experience. The video creator introduces himself as Meishwan Kuko and explains that he's one of the test players. He expresses that he was very doubtful of the marketing claims that this game could provide an amazingly vivid VR experience, but he has to admit, he was totally wrong. The game engine is so realistic. He feels like he actually is a goblin in another world. Meishwan explains that the game has a pain setting which can be set anywhere from 0% to 100%. He advises regular players to keep this set at 0, but mentions that hardcore players might enjoy the 100% challenge. Next, acting like a TikTok star, the goblin leads the viewer on a tour of the dungeon. He mentions that goblins seems to be the only playable race in the game at the moment, and then begins to introduce the only 2 NPCs in the game, starting with a rather annoyed-looking Simba the smith. Meishwan explains that players should be careful not to touch things in the blacksmith's shop, casually or bother the smith, as Simba can and will hit them with his hammer, as he seems to be demonstrating on the video. Meishwan then discusses that the game has a hunger system, and that players will need to buy food at the blacksmith shop. In fact, the blacksmith shop is the only place in the whole game where players seem to be able to spend money right now, as this is also where equipment is purchased. To acquire currency, players must complete tasks issued by the Lord. Right now, most tasks pay out in copper coins. Meishwan then comes to Sherlock, introducing him as the second NPC of the game. He also mentions the blue glowing dungeon core next to Sherlock, which apparently the players are calling blue, and that he seems to be some kind of special creature in the game. It's unclear if this entity is a separate NPC or what, but some tasks seem to be issued directly by him. Meishwan states that the game is still in a beta testing phase, so it's natural that there's only a few NPCs ready to interact with the players at this time. Given the amazing realism of what's already in the game, it looks like the only thing left for the developers to do is finish developing other locations further, he thinks. He praises the game's lack of any kind of heads-up display or status windows, saying that the name bar above other players' heads is the only thing added to the player's view. Meishwan wonders if this name bar will be displayed during combat for enemies. He's not sure about that. He proudly announces that he plans to explore the new Wastelands area as soon as it opens tomorrow, and that he will report back on that once he learns more. Continuing his new player guide, Meishwan explains that the game also has no proficiency system. Even if you mine for a day, nothing changes about your stats or abilities. However, players are speculating that gold may be more important in the future, so perhaps mining is still worthwhile to invest time into. Meishwan muses that perhaps the game will have more room for character growth in the future, and that perhaps he'll someday be a goblin battle mage. Meishwan also praises the intelligence of the functional task system, which assigns tasks to the goblins based on the needs of the dungeon at that time. If more ore is needed, more goblins get assigned to go mine it, and so on. Meishwan reassures players that they won't run out of tasks, and mentions that he's moved bricks for more than 10 hours since he registered today. Now I'm really curious how this 0% pain setting works. Is moving a brick as heavy for these guys as it is in real life? Or is it like playing as Miner Steve in Minecraft, where we don't really think it's work to move tons of blocks around for hours? Let me know what you think in the comments, friends. Anyway, Meishwan's explanation continues as he notes the interesting fact that objects in this game seem to stay where you leave them, rather than despawning or resetting in some way. Because of this, all this brick moving means they should slowly be permanently changing the landscape of the dungeon bit by bit every day. Sherlock, seeming annoyed at being caught in this video, looks on as MANHWA goes on to explain that players are apparently unable to violate a direct order from the City Lord. He speculates that this may be because goblins are a lower level race, and so they have some kind of innate fear and respect for a high power being like Sherlock. MANHWA then discusses the death mechanics in the game, warning that the pain of the game is quite serious if it's turned on, and he warns his viewers to not do what he did and run into a wall to die, as it was quite painful. He explains that players will be forced to go to the game's preparation menu after dying, and can only be revived after their body is repaired. He also warns that if something happens which makes your body unrepairable, such as being burned to dust, you'll have to create a new character body to log back in. MANHWA finishes his broadcast by reminding his fellow players to be careful and cherish their virtual lives. A bit confused by this all, Sherlock finishes the video and comments that he's curious what this other world is like, if these players from it wish to come work in his dungeon for free as a way of having fun. Sherlock scrolls further into the forums and says to himself that they seem really weird to him. Sherlock throws up his hands and decides to go deal with other things for the time being. Sherlock walks up to Simba, who is sleeping on the hard dungeon floor close to a couple goblins. Simba wakes with a start, shouting and grabbing his hammer reflexively. Something tells me Simba is getting sick of goblins messing with him, don't you think? Seeing that it's Sherlock who woke him, he quickly puts his hammer away and asks his lord how he can be of service. Sherlock informs him that he plans to let the goblins clean up the spider lair and asks what kind of equipment can be made from the materials currently on hand. Simba asks if this is the latest method Sherlock has come up with for the goblins to end themselves at, thinking the spiders will be too hard for mere goblins to take on. Sherlock disagrees, pointing out that these goblins are not like normal ones, and that based on the information he just reviewed, it seems that they're excited to go into battle. Simba has to agree that they're very diligent in their work, even though he finds many of their other behaviours incomprehensible. A note informs us that, in this world, blacksmiths can extract various metals from a large amount of diamonds. This makes no sense to me, like metallurgically, but let's accept it. Simba goes on, saying that thanks to the goblins' efforts, the current reserves of diamonds could be used to forge hundreds of ordinary items. Observing that Sherlock seems determined to build a top-tier dungeon, or else he would not have hired so many goblins. Simba also asks if Sherlock would like to consider hiring his skilled brother to come work with him. Sherlock dismisses the request and thinks to himself that the issue is that he doesn't have enough money to hire another blacksmith yet. Simba then says that the goblins have already asked him if they could buy equipment from him, and even made up a list of demands for him in the form of a scroll which he hands to Sherlock. Sherlock unrolls it and looks it over. The translators didn't translate what the requests were for, but judging from Sherlock's angry face, the demands are not at all reasonable, as he summarily turns down the request. Telling Simba not to worry about this, Sherlock instead tells him that he will provide a list of equipment prices, and that a price listing board will need to be created. This surprises Simba, who expected that the Lord would provision his troops with equipment directly. Sherlock explains that since coins are used as rewards in his dungeon, he needs some way to recover the coins back from the goblins. Simba remarks that he must have his own reasons as well. Changing the subject, Simba tells his lord that the dagger he was forging is ready and invites him to inspect it. Since it just came out of the forge, it's simply a blade with a long rod on the end, ready to be attached to a wooden handle. Sherlock thinks to himself that, without a proper handle added to it, it won't be as powerful a weapon as it could be. But since they're still in an entrepreneurial stage, he believes his goblins will be able to put up with it and overcome this difficulty. Typical management thinking, am I right, folks? Saber leans in and suggests that they provide panel explanations for these new items to help their players get up to speed faster. He mentions that he's already written some up and asks Sherlock to look them over. These function as basic RPG item descriptions. Since we've established there's no system windows inside the game for the players, I'm guessing these item panels must be displayed on the website or perhaps on the job board thing. Praising Blue's hard work, Sherlock then asks about this new prestige system and what kinds of rewards go with it. Saber replies that the higher the prestige of the player, the more advanced equipment they'll have, and their status among their peers will be elevated. On the other hand, if a player maintains a bad prestige, then they'll be restricted to the worst items and receive worse allocations in various other ways. Sherlock says that this makes sense to him and that he thinks the goblins themselves should also be excited by this. Sometime later, we watch a goblin waking up, calling out a cheery good morning to his fellow workmates. As the rest of the goblins wake up, comments ring out asking about the new weapons, why Simba is forging, if blacksmithing can be learned by players, and noticing the new item price list. Someone even comments that it's amazing that the game is somehow able to update without a maintenance downtime. Sensing the goblins' growing excitement and yelling about all the new updates and the promise of a new spider dungeon to fight in later today, Sherlock waits for the perfect time to make his announcement, using yet another of the dramatic flourishes which this man seems to love. He proudly proclaims that he, their great demon lord, has a new quest for his people. He decrees that they shall now go clear out the spider lair for the glory of the kingdom. Chapter 5. The goblin players cheer with excitement at the announcement. However, the mood settles a bit, and one goblin observes that since they don't have any equipment, how can going out to fight monsters be considered a gift from their lord? Another goblin responds that since there's no gold cost for entering the dungeon, there must be some plan for how the players will profit here. Meanwhile, Simba announces that his shop is now offering new items. A set of armor and a long sword can be purchased for a mere 600 copper coins. Furthermore, the whole server is limited to 5 sets. Sherlock looks on with a greedy smile, thinking to himself that, based on the work done yesterday, nobody should have over even 100 copper coins in their pocket yet, and thinking that his workers will push themselves even harder to get the coveted equipment. This will push the progress of the dungeon forwards even faster, while also giving Simba some time to craft more armor sets to sell. Sherlock's self-congratulations are cut short, however, as we watch a bunch of goblins excitedly grouped together, apparently shouting trade offers at one another. By exchanging their real-world information, it appears the players are willing to purchase the game's copper coins from one another using their real-world money. Sherlock is amazed, remarking that he had no idea there would be such a trading operation. Is it really so important to be one step ahead of the others for these goblins? Saber reminds his master that he did say players from the other world are spending whales. Saber says with sadness that if they were allowed to open a recharge channel to charge the players directly, they'd immediately become the richest dungeon. Sherlock is pleased though, seeing that the goblins have accomplished something he thought would be difficult for them, and quickly. He and Blue note that it looks like an equipped party ready to explore the wastelands has already formed. Saber asks if Sherlock will be going with them, but he says that he won't be, as they probably won't encounter the boss with his powerful aura present. However, Sherlock states that he has his own ways of observing them, and we see a large magical display screen pop into existence, allowing Sherlock to keep an eye on the dispatched adventuring party. The exploring goblins are proceeding with caution, not sure what to expect in this new hostile zone. Upon encountering their first spider, one goblin yells with fear at how large the new arachnid monsters are. A player named Arthur steps forward bravely, looking the monster right in its 2 eyes. Aren't spiders supposed to have 8 eyes, Mr. Illustrator? Well, I suppose these are magical spiders in another world, so perhaps I shouldn't worry about it. Regardless, Arthur reacts quickly to the monster, leaping forward and landing a piercing blow to the spider's head with his blade. The spider, enraged, flips its head back, sending Arthur flying upwards due to his grip on the handle. He lands hard on the dungeon floor, his weapon spinning by his side. A female goblin with the gamer name Palace Cat Demon runs up to Arthur, asking if he's alright. Arthur states that even though he's not at the 100% pain setting, the fall still hurt quite a bit. Gathering himself, Arthur says that according to the illustrated guide online, these spider creatures live in groups. He's now worried that, since this one escaped with its wound, it will return and warn the other spiders to come attack them as a mob. Looking around, 2 other goblins announce that Arthur's fears seem to be confirmed, as a large group of spiders rushes into the cave with them. The group wonders if they even have a chance to flee, but it appears the spiders made short work of them. Moments later, the goblins are all defeated, and we see the spiders wrapping their bodies up in silk cocoons, perhaps to eat later. Watching from the magical computer, Sherlock and Saber are unimpressed. Gigi Saber says, pointing out that, for this being the first run into the wasteland, this was still rather good. Back in the dungeon core, we see the defeated goblins popping back into existence, having made new characters. The other players rush around them, shouting questions about the new area's difficulty and challenges. How did they die? What did they face? Were there any explosions? They demand that the defeated party speak. The questions pile up as the players observe that the party just lost all of their extremely expensive equipment in the spider cave, where perhaps an actual goblin might have reacted with fear and horror to what they just experienced. Instead, we see one of the defeated goblins is absolutely excited now. He declares that the game is just too real and that the spider monsters were amazing, while some express concern that this seems to be turning into a horror game. Other voices quickly point out that all they'll need is more players, more resources, and better tactics. Then surely they'll be clearing this new zone in no time. Everyone goes back to their basic dungeon work excited, more determined than ever to collect the coins needed for good equipment. Sherlock looks on, amused that, despite their failure, the goblins seem to have enjoyed their new playground. Saber confirms that they'll probably go back in several waves, throwing away more equipment and coming back to purchase even more replacement gear from them. The plan works. Sherlock notes that this scheme also depends on Saber's unique powers, which allow them to easily rebuild the goblin players' bodies and reattach their projected consciousness to it. Saber humbly replies that it's his honor to serve the Demon Lord. Sherlock asks Blue to keep an eye on the dungeon while he heads to the spider's lair himself to inspect the situation. Looking over the one dead spider corpse on the scene, Sherlock begins to collect the equipment left behind by the defeated party. After all, the dungeon is just getting started. It would be foolish to leave all this gear behind, right? As he collects a blade sticking out of the dead spider, Sherlock is surprised to sense some kind of magical energy fluctuation inside the monster's dead body. Not sure what this is, Sherlock decides to bring the whole corpse back to the dungeon, thinking that Simba may be able to do something with it. With a flash of magical power, Sherlock returns to the dungeon's center, the spider corpse landing on the ground beside him. The goblins, which didn't go on the expedition, are all excited to finally see this new subterranean spider monster, with many commenting that it's just too lifelike and frightening. One of the goblins, which did go on the adventure, notices something though. The spider that their lord brought back is the exact same one which Arthur stabbed. The wound location matches exactly. It must have died of the wound once it ran back to warn the other spiders. Tossing two of the recovered blades at the goblins, Sherlock asks them to call Simba over and to help Simba dissect this spider corpse. The goblins are excited, thinking that they must have triggered a hidden mission of some kind. After all, the first monster killed must have something special about it, right? Other goblins react with envy at this turn of events, wishing they'd gone out also. Simba arrives on the scene, and Sherlock tells him that there seems to be something in the spider's stomach. He advises Simba to be careful not to damage whatever it is, and tells him to use two goblins as assistants. With a determined look, Simba cracks open the spider's exoskeleton, much to the disgust of the assembled goblins. Simba then orders his assistant goblin to go inside the corpse and search carefully. The goblin practically sticks his whole body into the monster's corpse, and moments later, emerges triumphantly, holding up a giant glowing green orb of some kind. That's the end of Chapter 5. Do you listeners like how Sherlock and Saber's plan is coming together? I hope you've enjoyed this recap presentation of Dungeon. Start by enslaving Blue Star players thus far, and if you have, please like this video and please subscribe so you can catch the next installment. In addition, if you really like this story, I'd ask you to look into who the original authors and illustrators of this work are and see if they have any current projects which you can support, or just send them a donation. I'm just starting this recap channel out, so I would love to hear your feedback and opinions, and I'd love to know about anything I could do to improve the quality of these videos. Thank you so much for watching.